Hi everyone. It's great to be here, and it's great to see such a wonderful crowd. I am actually afraid of the microphone. It's just, okay. Okay. So I am definitely one of those writers who is not very good at talking about my book. I'm probably going to spend most of the time reading, but one of the things that has struck me recently about fiction is the fact that it is so relevant to our lives. And I wish that I could say that, in some ways, I wish I could say this book was not. But it's about a young woman who's growing up in East Yorkshire in the 1970s, and she's dealing with the difficulties of having a mother who has a mental illness, and she's also dealing with coming to terms with the possibility that she may actually be a lesbian. And so she's trying to negotiate those difficulties in her life. And she lives, as I mentioned, she lives in East Yorkshire. It's a town in a small village, and it's an area of. It's actually it has the fastest eroding coastline in Europe, which Jessie, the protagonist, thinks is probably the most interesting thing about the place that she lives. And so she's become friends with Tracy in this new village that she's moved to, and she's also encountered a young man named Malcolm, who seems very interesting to her. But Tracy is a popular girl, and Jessie is desperate to fit in. So this is a scene after she's been talking to Malcolm for a while. As I was talking to Malcolm, I noticed Tracy stalking down the corridor towards us, a deep scowl on her face. Bloody hell, Jessie. First you disappear, and then I find you talking to the biggest puffer in all Yorkshire. Stop hanging about in the corridor, Nancy boy, she said, ignoring me and turning to Malcolm. Don't tell me what to do, Tracy Grasby, Malcolm said, a bright flush flooding his face. Who died and made you queen, anyway? There's only one queen round here, and it's not me, Tracy said, her face twisted in disdain. What are you doing anyway? Hanging about in a dark corner so you can wank off while you think about little boys? God, you're so ridiculous, Malcolm said, trying to dismiss Tracy with a haughty look. But I could see how those words stung him. Pufter, Nancy boy, queen. Suddenly I realised that this was how a boy like Malcolm was summed up. There had been a few boys like him at my last school, boys whose movements were sweeping and fluid, whose voices weren't big and booming, whose expressions were more animated than boys were supposed to be. They were the boys who stood on the sidelines when the others played football or rugby, whom everyone laughed at when they ran or threw a ball. Those boys were teased far more relentlessly than I had ever been. They were not just mocked, they were hated. And no one, not even the teachers, ever stood up for them. Malcolm lives on the edge of a cliff, I said, hoping to somehow ease Tracy out of her animosity. In a caravan. The council said they're going to move it, or it'll fall off. Bloody hell, said Tracy. Is that true, Nancy boy? Hey, with a bit of luck, maybe you'll be in it when it goes over the edge. Ha ha, very funny. Malcolm's voice was flat, his face now a blazing beetroot red. It is as far as I'm concerned, right, Jessie? She peered at me, belligerent, expectant. Malcolm stared at me, a question folded into his face. I bit my lip. Hey, what's that you're reading? Tracy made a grab for the book nestled under Malcolm's arm and wrenched it from his grip. Crime and Punishment? A book about puffs and homos, is it? Now that's a crime that needs to be punished. Give it back, Malcolm demanded. I watched while delight bloomed across Tracy's features, and Malcolm's twisted in distress. Give it back, you bloody cow. Right, that's it, Tracy said. I'll teach you to call me a cow. With that, she turned and ran down the corridor to a window and began wrestling it open. Malcolm stumbled over after her, slack-limbed and uncoordinated. He did run like those boys that everyone laughed at, and in my mind I could hear the taunts. Pufda, Nancy boy. The homo runs like a girl. Before Malcolm caught her, Tracy managed to open the window and hurl the book outside. I watched it glide in a single sweeping arc, its pages fluttering like flimsy, futile limbs as it curved upward, then plunged onto the playground. Malcolm shuddered to a halt, staring open-mouthed through the window as the book made its hopeless trajectory. "What the hell did you do that for?" Tracy grinned. "Because I felt like it, Pufda." "God, you really are a bloody cow, Tracy Grasby," Malcolm said, his voice cracked and hollow. Then he turned and began walking back toward me. He marched, his shoulders hunched, his face folded in defeated fury, so that his eyes seemed nothing more than flickering lashes, and his lips were compressed into a hard, flat line. I knew that look. It was the one I had worn so many times myself. I also knew the helpless anger and humiliation that Malcolm carried, the way he must be struggling to hold back tears. I glanced at Tracy, her eyes wide and shimmering, her smile a crescent of satisfaction across her face. I had seen that look too, on the faces of the girls and boys who had taunted me, their pleasure rising as my hope plummeted as fast and inevitably as Malcolm's book had fallen and hit the ground. "What the hell are you doing hanging around with her for?" Malcolm demanded when he reached me. I pictured his battered caravan. I saw myself standing beside it on a crumbling cliff edge, where the soft boulder clay of the East Yorkshire coast cascaded down to the sea. I could stay in place, on the safe ground with Tracy, or I could step toward Malcolm, to the very edge of that cliff, and risk tumbling into the relentless waves. It was a choice that was easy to make. "Tracy's my best friend," I said.